You got a rank, old man? Or did they just let ghosts wander onto this base now? The laughter came fast, sharp as gravel under combat boots, cutting across the hot afternoon air at Coronado. It rolled through the SEAL qualification yard where young operators stood in clusters, all muscle, confidence, and fresh-earned arrogance. The Pacific wind pushed hard off the water, rattling range flags and stirring dust along the concrete. But the old man near the perimeter fence did not move. Elias Mercer stood with both hands resting lightly on a weathered cane, though there was nothing frail in the way he held himself. He wore a faded olive field jacket gone soft with age, old denim, worn work boots scuffed by years no one there could imagine, and a small subdued patch stitched above his breast pocket so faded it looked almost erased by time. Chief Logan Pierce stepped closer, a grin on his face that carried the reckless edge of a man too young to believe legends could breathe. At 32, he was respected, feared, and certain he understood power. He looked Mercer over the way men inspect something misplaced. We're running selection evolutions, not a history tour. A few of the younger SEALs smirked. One leaned against a gear crate and muttered, "Maybe he stormed Normandy." More laughter. Mercer's pale blue eyes drifted not to the men, but to the line of helicopters beyond the tarmac, rotors still, sunlight flashing off canopies. He studied them as though hearing something beneath the noise no one else could hear. That calm, unsettled Logan more than defiance would have. "I asked you something," Logan pressed. "Rank." Mercer turned slowly, his face lined deep by salt, wind, and years, but there was no irritation in him, only stillness. He seemed to weigh the question against memories no one there could touch. Then, in a voice low enough that men leaned in to catch it, he said, "Rank expired." A few chuckles answered. Logan smirked wider. "Convenient." Mercer's gaze lifted and fixed on him with quiet precision. Call sign didn't. The laughter faded by a degree. Wind hissed through the chain-link fence. Somewhere farther down the compound, a metal halyard tapped a flagpole in slow rhythm. Logan crossed his arms. "All right, old-timer. Let's hear this legendary call sign." Mercer said nothing for a beat, and in that pause even the younger operators felt something shift they could not explain. Then he spoke. "Hammer 1. The words were simple, soft, but they landed strangely heavy. For a moment nobody moved. Then one of the SEALs barked out a laugh. "Hammer 1? Sounds like a bad action movie." More laughter returned, thinner this time. Logan shook his head. "That supposed to impress us?" Mercer looked toward the operations building where dark windows reflected afternoon glare. "Wasn't meant to." Logan stepped closer, now playing to his audience. "You know what I think? I think you heard stories in some VFW hall and decided to borrow one." He pointed toward the gate. "You can watch from outside." Mercer did not respond. His thumb brushed the worn edge of the faded patch on his chest, almost unconsciously, and Senior Chief Nolan Reed, standing near a radio console inside the open bay, froze at the motion. His eyes narrowed. Not at Mercer's face, at the patch, at the name, at something old and buried stirring where it should not. Then, without warning, a dead secure radio channel mounted on the wall behind him crackled to life with a hiss of static no one had heard in years. The hiss of static froze the air harder than any shouted command. It crackled from the old secure radio mounted beside the open bay, a sound so out of place every head turned at once. Dust moved in thin ribbons across the concrete. Somewhere overhead a gull cried against the ocean wind, but inside the qualification yard, silence settled heavy. Senior Chief Nolan Reed stepped toward the radio as if pulled by instinct older than reason. The set was obsolete, a relic preserved for ceremonial training displays, powered but never used. Yet amber signal lights flickered alive one by one. Logan Pierce let out a short, uneasy laugh meant to recover control. Somebody is messing with the old equipment, but his voice no longer carried the easy swagger from moments before. Reed did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the panel where a coded identifier blinked. Through static bursts, broken but unmistakable, Mercer stood exactly where he had been, unmoved, as though the radio had merely confirmed something he already expected. Then through the hiss came a clipped mechanical tone followed by a voice so faint it might have been memory itself. Hammer 1, authentication pending. The words were thin, distorted, almost swallowed by interference. Yet every syllable struck like a pressure change. One of the younger operators lowered the coffee cup in his hand without realizing it. Another took an involuntary step back. Logan stared at Mercer now with the first crack of uncertainty touching his expression. "What is this?" he demanded. Reed ignored him and moved to the console, fingers hovering over switches he had only studied in archived procedures. He entered a dormant query code. The monitor hesitated, then glowed with a green field of text. Access request routed. Legacy Operations Registry. Reed's breathing changed. He knew enough not to speak too fast. "Chief," one operator whispered. "What does that mean?" Reed did not answer. His gaze drifted toward Mercer's weathered patch, and for the first time he saw not faded thread, but a symbol half buried under age. A hammer inside a circle, nearly erased. His stomach tightened. Logan tried again to seize the room. "It is an old prank. That is all this is." Mercer finally looked at him. Not angry, not triumphant, merely tired. "Some channels do not die," he said softly. Wind pushed harder through the open bay, carrying the smell of salt and warm engine oil. The words stirred something dormant in Reed's memory. A briefing fragment heard years ago from an admiral after too much whiskey at a retirement dinner. A unit that officially never existed. An extraction team that brought men home from places maps denied. A call sign spoken only in classified rooms. Hammer 1. Reed felt a chill despite the heat. Before anyone could speak, the monitor flashed red, then changed to secure priority routing. An encrypted handshake request was climbing the chain automatically. Logan moved toward the console. "Shut it down." Reed stepped between him and the panel. It was a small motion, but enough to stop the younger man cold. "Do not touch anything." There was no humor left in his voice, only command. Across the yard, a siren did not sound, but a muted tone rolled once through the base public address system, low and almost ceremonial. Heads turned toward headquarters. Doors opened in distant buildings. People emerged looking confused. Logan's certainty was unraveling, though pride kept him rigid. "Who are you?" he asked Mercer, quieter now. Mercer looked past him toward the horizon where the Pacific shimmered silver under the sun. "A man who once answered when others did not." Then the radio crackled again, stronger this time, and a new voice, sharp with flag-level authority, cut through the static. "This is Pacific Command Relay. Confirm visual on Hammer 1. Hold all movement. Rear Admiral Hale is en route." The words from Pacific Command seemed to pull the oxygen out of the yard. Nobody laughed now. Even the surf beyond the dunes sounded distant, reduced to a hush beneath the pounding in younger men's ears. Logan Pierce stood rigid, jaw set, trying to hold onto the authority that had carried him through every test of his adult life. But something larger than rank had entered the space, and he could feel it slipping from his grasp. Senior Chief Nolan Reed kept his hand near the radio console as though guarding a sacred object. Amber lights continued to pulse across the panel in slow measured rhythm, each flash reflecting off steel cabinets and polished concrete. "Hold all movement," the voice had said, and somehow the entire base obeyed. Vehicles that had been rolling along the service road stopped where they were. A maintenance crew near the hangars paused mid-task. Even a helicopter crew preparing checks stood frozen beside their aircraft, as though some invisible gravity had settled over the installation. Logan finally found his voice. "This is impossible." Mercer turned slightly toward him, not as a victor facing a defeated rival, but with the quiet patience of a man who had seen disbelief before. "Most truths are," he said. Yet Logan's pride had not died. It flared once more. "No. Somebody fed old records into a dead system. This is theater." He took a step toward Mercer, challenging him again, though less certain than before. "If you were what that channel says, why stand here letting us mock you?" Mercer looked out toward the training surf where sunlight danced on whitecaps. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his thumb brushed the old patch again, and the present seemed to thin. In his mind, the warm California wind vanished, replaced by rotor wash over black water, stars hidden behind storm cloud, voices and headsets reduced to clipped whispers. A younger man, broad-shouldered and unscarred by time, sat strapped inside a dark helicopter, one gloved hand over a field radio as a frightened voice crackled through static. Hammer one, they are cut off. The memory came not in noise but in feeling. Wait, duty. Men waiting to be brought home. A hand gripping his shoulder before a jump. The old call sign spoken not as a title but as trust. Then the vision dissolved as quickly as it came, leaving only salt air and the hard afternoon light. Reed watched Mercer's face change by the smallest degree and understood there were doors in this man no one there could force open. Before Logan could answer, bass speakers clicked alive again. This time a terse announcement rolled across the compound. Command transit entering restricted corridor. Stand clear. Heads turned toward the road leading from headquarters. Far off, black sport utility vehicles appeared moving fast, too fast for ceremony. Their tires sent dust lifting in pale trails behind them. One of the younger operators whispered, "Admiral?" as if saying it too loudly might break something fragile. Logan felt it then, the first true unease. Men did not drive like that for ghosts. Reed stepped closer to him, voice low. "Chief, there are stories they do not teach in selection." Logan looked at him. "You believe this?" Reed's eyes never left the approaching vehicles. "I think we are standing inside one." Mercer shifted his cane and took one slow step forward into the wind. The old patch on his chest fluttered slightly. In the lead vehicle, sunlight flashed across a 4-star flag mounted on the fender. The yard fell so silent that when the convoy brakes hissed at the curb, the sound seemed louder than thunder. The lead vehicle door opened before the engine fully settled, and Rear Admiral Thomas Hale stepped out with the force of a storm front. He was a tall man, silver-haired and rigid with the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. His dress uniform caught the California sun in hard lines of gold and dark navy, but it was not the rank on his shoulders that froze the yard. It was his face. The moment his eyes found Elias Mercer, every trace of command polish broke into something rawer, older, almost personal. He did not glance at Logan Pierce. He did not acknowledge the gathered operators. He walked straight past them, shoes striking concrete in measured rhythm, while 2 aides struggled to keep pace behind him. No one breathed. Logan felt every certainty he had built collapse by degrees he could not stop. Hale came within 10 feet of Mercer and halted. For a heartbeat the wind seemed to die with him. Then, before a base full of hardened operators, the Rear Admiral raised a hand in a salute so crisp it cut the silence in two. Gasps did not sound aloud, but they moved through the yard like a current. Logan's mouth parted without words. Senior Chief Reed went rigid at attention by instinct alone. Mercer looked at Hale for a long quiet moment, almost saddened by what time had done to them both. Then he returned the salute, slower, not weaker, but heavy with memory. Hale lowered his hand. His voice, when it came, carried not parade ground thunder but restrained emotion. "Permission to address you, sir." The word "sir" struck Logan harder than any reprimand. Mercer gave the smallest nod. "Still too formal, Tom." A flicker of warmth crossed Hale's severe face. It vanished quickly. He turned then, surveying the stunned operators around him, his gaze landing at last on Logan Pierce. Who challenged his identity? Nobody moved. Logan stepped forward because pride still demanded it, though his throat had gone dry. "I did, Admiral." Hale studied him with unnerving calm. "And when you asked his rank?" Logan swallowed. "He gave a call sign." Hale nodded once. "He gave you more than that. He gave you a warning." The younger operators exchanged glances, unable to reconcile the old man in denim with the weight now pressing through the scene. One finally whispered, "Who is he?" Hale heard it. He looked back to Mercer as though deciding how much history living men were permitted. "There was a unit before some of your doctrines had names," he said. "When teams vanished where maps ended, One call sign meant extraction was still possible. His eyes hardened. Hammer 1. The words hung like a bell tone. Logan felt his pulse thudding in his ears. Mercer shifted slightly, and the motion stirred another memory loose inside him. Desert wind over gravel strips. A lantern swinging inside a field command tent. A young lieutenant with frightened eyes asking if they could make the window. Mercer, decades younger, answering only by keying a radio and speaking the same call sign. Men straightening at the sound of it. Hope moving through exhausted faces. The memory faded as Hale stepped closer to Mercer and lowered his voice. We thought you would never come back to a base. Mercer's eyes stayed on the Pacific beyond the dunes. I did not come for a base. He glanced at Logan, then the younger men. I came to see whether silence still meant discipline. No one answered. The sentence landed too deep. Then from somewhere along the formation line came the scrape of boots. One operator snapped to attention. Then another. Then another. Like a wave moving through steel, the entire yard straightened at once without command, and Logan Pierce, face drained of arrogance, slowly brought his own hand to salute the man he had mocked. The salute held longer than custom required, not because protocol demanded it, but because no man there seemed willing to be first to lower his hand. The ocean wind moved through the yard with a low restless hum, tugging at sleeves and flag lines, but inside that silence something had changed beyond rank. Logan Pierce felt it most. The weight was not humiliation. It was recognition arriving too late. When the salute finally fell, Rear Admiral Hale turned slowly toward the assembled operators. His expression restored to command, though something solemn remained in his eyes. Listen carefully, he said, and even the gulls wheeling over the surf seemed distant. Most of you have trained your whole careers to inherit a standard you assume was handed down intact. It was not. Men like him built it under conditions your manuals only summarize. No one shifted. No one blinked. Hale stepped beside Mercer, not above him but beside him, and that alone taught more than any speech. Logan lowered his hand and took one step forward, the old certainty gone from his posture. Sir, he said, voice rougher now. Why did nobody know? Mercer gave a faint, almost amused breath through his nose. Because some work was meant to disappear. His eyes drifted to the younger men. If everyone knows a legend, it usually was not the quietest one. A few nervous smiles flickered, not from comfort but release. Yet Logan's question had opened something in the yard. Curiosity displaced arrogance. One of the youngest operators, hardly older than 24, spoke before thinking. Were you really in command of those missions? Mercer looked at the kid as though seeing generations layered in one face. Command is a loud word, he said. I brought people home. The simplicity of it landed harder than heroics would have. Senior Chief Reed, still near the radio console, looked at the blinking legacy channel and asked what no one else dared. Is Hammer 1 still active? Mercer did not answer at once. His thumb brushed the worn patch again, and the old leather seam beneath his fingers seemed to wake another ghost. A dry mountain wind, red dust spiraling under moonlight. A radio pressed close while a frightened voice whispered coordinates fading under static. A younger Mercer answering calm as stone. Hold your line. Hammer 1 inbound. Then silence. Then rotor blades somewhere beyond darkness. He returned to the yard and said softly, Some call signs do not retire. They become memory others carry. Hale nodded as though hearing an old creed. Then he faced Logan directly. Chief Pierce, what was the first thing you asked him? Logan's face tightened. His rank, Admiral. And what did you assume? Logan hesitated. Pride warred with honesty, then lost. That he was nobody. Hale let the admission sit in open air. That mistake has undone stronger men. Yet there was no cruelty in it. Only instruction. Logan looked at Mercer now without challenge. I judged you wrong. Mercer studied him for a long moment. No, he said quietly. You tested what had not asked to be tested. He shifted his cane and, to Logan's surprise, stepped closer. That can be corrected. The words were mercy, not rebuke, and somehow that stung deeper. At the edge of the formation, an aide hurried toward Hale carrying a sealed folder, stopped, whispered into the Admiral's ear. Hale's eyes sharpened. He looked back at Mercer with disbelief almost hidden. They reopened the old archive when your call sign hit the net. He held up the folder. There is something here they think this base should hear. A murmur moved through the operators. Logan felt tension rise again, but of a different kind now. Not fear of exposure, but awe at what remained unrevealed. Mercer looked at the folder and for the first time seemed reluctant. That history was buried for a reason. Hale answered in a low voice only nearby men caught. Perhaps today is the day it is returned. Rear Admiral Hale held the sealed folder without opening it, as though even paper could carry too much weight. The sun had dipped just enough to throw longer shadows across the yard, stretching boot lines over concrete like dark bars, while the Pacific wind carried a cooler edge now, salted and sharp. Every operator remained where he stood. Training schedules had dissolved. Time itself seemed paused around the old man in faded denim. Hale looked once more at Mercer, searching his face for refusal. Mercer gave none, but his silence held warning. At last Hale broke the seal. The paper inside crackled loudly in the hush. He unfolded a yellowed operations brief and read not with ceremony, but with the restraint of a man reopening something sacred. Special Maritime Recovery Detachment. Mission Archive declassified by Emergency Flag Authority. A murmur stirred and vanished. Logan Pierce felt the words strike deeper than any title. This was not legend told over drinks. It was record. Hale continued. Primary extraction lead. Call sign Hammer 1. Credited with recovery of 37 isolated personnel across denied theaters. Status line. He paused, jaw tightening. Operational losses prevented by command improvisation beyond doctrine. He lowered the page and looked at Mercer almost accusingly. You never told them. Mercer's expression did not move. There was nothing to tell. Logan stared, unable to reconcile the quiet man he had mocked with the shape of the history now unfolding. 37 men? He said almost to himself. Mercer glanced toward the surf. 37 made it home. That was the number that mattered. The young operator who had spoken earlier whispered, "That is impossible." Mercer answered without turning. "Most worthwhile things are." Then Hale unfolded a second sheet, older still, edges browned by decades. "There is more." His voice lowered. Recommendation entered, never publicly awarded. He looked at Mercer. "You refused citation." Several operators exchanged stunned looks. Logan stepped closer despite himself. "You turned down an award?" Mercer's pale eyes settled on him. Men were missing. Decorations felt noisy. The sentence seemed to pass through the formation like a cold current. Senior Chief Reed let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. But Hale was not finished. He withdrew from the folder a worn photograph, black and white, corners frayed. He held it up. 5 young operators stood beside a helicopter under desert floodlights. One of them, impossibly young but unmistakable, was Mercer. Beside him stood a lieutenant with fierce eyes and impossible posture. Logan frowned, then looked at Hale in shock. "That is you." Hale gave a slow nod. "He brought me home before I ever wore stars." The yard seemed to tilt. Even Mercer looked away at that. For a long second, no one spoke. Then the dead secure radio crackled once more, startling everyone. Not static this time. A clear tone. A recorded archive auto-triggered by the reopened file. A younger voice, urgent but steady, filled the air. "Hammer 1, corridor open. We move because you move." The recording ended in soft static, but no man there would. Forget it. Logan felt something break inside him that pride had long defended. He stepped before Mercer and, in front of his whole team, removed the trident insignia pin from his own chest. He held it out with both hands. "I am not worthy to offer apology equal to the insult," he said, voice unsteady. "But I ask permission to earn back respect." Mercer looked at the pin, then at the young man holding it as though offering confession. He did not take it. Instead, he closed Logan's fingers over it. "Keep your trident," he said. "Just learn what it was forged to protect." Hale watched with an expression almost like relief. Yet as the wind moved again through the yard, an aide approached at a run, whispering urgent news into Hale's ear. The Admiral's face changed. He turned sharply toward Mercer. Washington heard the channel wake up. He lowered his voice. "They are sending someone." The words settled over the yard with a strange gravity. Washington heard the channel wake up. "They are sending someone." Even among men trained not to show unease, shoulders tightened. Rear Admiral Hale rarely sounded uncertain, yet now a trace of it edged his voice. Logan Pierce glanced toward Mercer expecting alarm, but the old man only looked west where the sun hung low over the Pacific, turning the water into hammered bronze. "I told you some channels do not die," he said softly. Hale stepped closer. "You do not understand. If they reopen that authority chain, this is above Fleet Command." Mercer gave a faint, tired smile. "Tom, it was always above Fleet Command." The remark unsettled Hale more than any warning. A distant rotor thrum began to build beyond the dunes, low at first, almost mistaken for surf, then unmistakable. Heads lifted across the yard. A black helicopter appeared from the coast approach, banking wide over the base before descending toward the adjacent parade field. Its arrival carried none of the show of ceremony, only quiet urgency. Rotor wash pushed grit in spirals through the afternoon light. Younger operators shielded their eyes. Logan felt his pulse rise again, though now awe had displaced confusion. Senior Chief Reed murmured almost to himself, "This keeps getting larger." Mercer watched the aircraft settle as though recognizing an old ghost returning. The side door opened. A lone officer descended, older than Hale, broad-shouldered despite age, wearing the dark service uniform of a man who had long stopped needing introductions. No insignia was visible from distance, yet Hale snapped instantly to attention. That alone sent a visible shock through the formation. "Good Lord," Reed breathed. The officer walked with measured pace across the tarmac while rotor blades slowed behind him. No aides followed. No entourage. Just one man moving as if the years between then and now had folded shut. Logan saw Mercer's expression alter by the smallest degree, not surprise, but memory arriving uninvited. The officer stopped a few feet away. His eyes, pale and sharp despite age, rested on Mercer. For several seconds no one spoke. Wind moved through the silence. Then the newcomer said in a gravel voice worn smooth by command, "Still making entrances through chaos, Eli." Mercer's face softened. "You always were late, Robert." A few operators exchanged stunned glances. The man was no legend from rumor. He was living history speaking in familiar tone. Hale stepped aside almost reverently. "Mr. Secretary," he said. The title struck Logan like a blow. "Secretary of the Navy. Here. For this." The secretary ignored everyone else and did something no one expected. He raised a salute to Mercer. Not formal. Personal. Older than protocol. Mercer returned it. Logan felt every lesson about hierarchy rearrange itself. The secretary looked over the assembled operators. "Which of you asked his rank as a joke?" Logan stepped forward without hesitation. "I did, sir." The older man studied him, not harshly, but with piercing calm. "Then you have been handed a better lesson than most receive in a lifetime." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small tarnished challenge coin, edges worn almost smooth. He placed it in Logan's palm. On one side, a hammer insignia nearly erased. On the other, a single line engraved, "Return with honor." Logan stared speechless. The secretary turned back to Mercer. "There is one thing they never put in the file," he said. "The men wearing this trident today exist partly because you rewrote what extraction meant." Mercer's gaze lowered as if praise sat uncomfortably on him. "Men did what was required." "No," the secretary said quietly. "You changed doctrine." The younger operators stood motionless, hearing their profession spoken of as inheritance rather than entitlement. Then the secretary looked toward the radio console, still pulsing amber. There is one final transmission archived under Hammer 1. He nodded to Reed. Play it. Reed hesitated, then reached for the switch, and static filled the yard once more. Static washed over the yard in a low ocean-like hiss, rising and falling through the old speaker as Senior Chief Reed turned the selector with careful fingers. Every man leaned into the sound without moving. Even the secretary seemed to brace for what memory might return. Then the static thinned. A younger voice emerged, grainy with age but unmistakably alive. This is Hammer 1. If this transmission is ever heard outside the mission, it means the men beside me made it home. The words rolled through the warm, salt air and seemed to suspend time itself. Logan Pierce felt his throat tighten. No bravado lived in the voice. Only calm. Only duty. The recording continued. To those who come after us, remember this. Skill will earn respect. Silence will earn trust. But bringing others home is what earns honor. Several operators stared ahead as if hearing scripture. Mercer lowered his eyes, almost unwilling to hear his own younger voice. Yet the tape was not finished. There was a pause, a burst of static. Then another voice entered, younger still, breathless with urgency. Logan recognized it before Hale did. It was the secretary decades earlier. Hammer 1, corridor closing. Mercer's recorded reply came steady as stone. Then we widened the corridor. A few stunned smiles flickered through the formation at the impossible simplicity of it. The secretary stood motionless, jaw tight, hearing his younger self called back from dust. Then the final part of the transmission came, softer than the rest. If one day they ask who held the line, tell them no one man does. The line is held each time the next one stands when called. The recording clicked dead. No one moved after the silence returned. The surf beyond the dunes seemed louder now, as if the whole coast had leaned closer. Logan looked at the old challenge coin in his palm and understood it no longer as token, but burden. He stepped toward Mercer again, not as challenger now, but student. Sir, he said, voice nearly breaking, we thought readiness was proving ourselves. Mercer looked at the younger men assembled before him. Readiness is what remains when pride leaves. The sentence settled over them with almost physical force. Rear Admiral Hale glanced toward the secretary, who gave a small nod, and something unspoken passed between men who had shared older weather. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, the secretary turned to the assembled SEAL operators and said, "Form ranks." No drill command had ever moved faster. Boots aligned in seconds. The yard transformed from stunned gathering into living formation. The secretary stepped beside Mercer. Today you stand inspection. Confusion flickered until he added, by the man who taught part of your profession before your profession had a name. Logan's breath caught. Mercer shook his head faintly, resisting. Robert. The secretary cut him off. Some debts are paid with silence. Some with witness. Mercer looked down the line of young faces, many now rigid with reverence rather than bravado. The wind lifted the edge of his faded jacket. For a long time he said nothing. Then he began walking the formation, cane tapping softly against concrete, eyes moving from man to man, not inspecting uniforms but presence. When he reached Logan he paused. What is your call sign, Chief? Logan answered firmly. Reaper 6, sir. Mercer studied him. Carry it lightly. He moved on. When he reached the end of the ranks, he turned back toward the entire base. Even maintenance crews had gathered at the perimeter, silent. The secretary stepped forward and called in a voice that carried to every corner of the yard. On my mark. A pause. Wind snapping a distant flag. Render honors. And in one breathtaking motion the entire base, operators, chiefs, mechanics, officers, even the admiral and the secretary, rose together in a salute not to rank, but to one forgotten man standing alone beneath the Pacific sun. The salute held in the golden wash of late afternoon until it no longer felt like protocol, but prayer. Wind moved through the ranks, carrying salt and distant kelp, fluttering sleeves and flags, but no one lowered a hand before Elias Mercer did. His return salute was slow, almost reluctant, as if accepting honor had always been harder for him than carrying burden. When arms finally fell, the yard remained silent. No order broke it. No one wanted to disturb what had settled there. The secretary stepped back first, giving the space not to rank, but to memory. Rear Admiral Hale removed his cap and held it under his arm. Logan Pierce stood in the front rank, changed in a way his men could feel though none could name. Mercer looked down the line of young operators once more, and for the first time a faint warmth touched his weathered face. "You stand straighter than you did this morning," he said. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the formation, not mocking, but human, releasing tension at last. Logan managed a small smile. "We know more now, sir." Mercer shook his head gently. "You know enough to begin." The secretary stepped forward, carrying the worn challenge coin Logan had nearly dropped earlier. He pressed it back into Logan's hand. "Pass this when you meet a young man too sure of himself." Logan closed his fingers around it as though receiving something holy. "Yes, sir." Then, unexpectedly, Mercer reached to the faded patch on his own chest and with careful fingers removed it. The old cloth, frayed and sun-bleached, seemed too humble to hold such history. He handed it to Logan. The younger man stared, almost refusing. "I cannot take this." Mercer nodded toward the trident on Logan's chest. "Then keep it until you meet someone who asks rank before character." Logan took it with both hands. His eyes shone, though he said nothing. Some moments do not survive speech. The sun had dipped low enough now to cast the Pacific in copper light. A bugler far across base sounded retreat, the notes carrying soft and lonely through evening air. Men instinctively turned toward the flag, then back toward Mercer, torn between two loyalties and realizing they were one. The secretary looked at his watch, then at Mercer. "Will you stay for dinner at the officers' club?" Mercer gave a dry smile. "I came to watch a training yard, not attend a banquet." Even Hale laughed quietly, still refusing every ceremony. Mercer tapped his cane once against concrete. "Ceremonies end. Character stays." Then he turned toward the gate where he had first stood alone only hours before. Logan stepped forward. "May I walk you out?" Mercer studied him, then nodded. Together they crossed the yard while ranks parted silently for them. No one spoke as he passed. Men simply watched, some at attention, some with heads slightly bowed, as if witnessing something too rare to interrupt. At the gate Mercer paused and looked once more over his shoulder at the base, the helicopters, the young operators, the sea beyond. "Hammer 1, Logan said quietly, testing the old call sign not as myth but respect. Mercer answered without turning fully. "That belonged to another season." He tapped the patch in Logan's hand. "What matters is what you answer when your own call comes." Then he walked out through the gate into fading light, just an old man in denim disappearing down a road lined with wind-bent pines. For a long time Logan stood there holding the patch while evening settled over the base. Finally Senior Chief Reed stepped beside him and asked, "What do we do with a day like this?" Logan looked at the horizon where Mercer had vanished and answered in a voice quieter than before. "Remember it when we meet the next quiet man no one notices." Above them the flag stirred in the dusk. Somewhere waves rolled against shore in endless cadence. And on that base, long after vehicles moved again and training resumed, men would speak softly of the day a joke about rank became a lesson in honor. Because some call signs fade from radios, but never from memory. And some salutes last a lifetime,